The Buffalo Sabres entered this season with lofty expectations. As was the case for the last few years, the Sabres were everybody's sexy darling as a team to finally break the schneid of a 13-year playoff drought and make the playoffs. With all their young talent, a new coach behind the bench, and an Atlantic division that seemed to be softening, there was a lot of hope in Buffalo that the Sabres would finally reach the promised land, but now 2.5 months into the season, the Buffalo Sabres are the worst team in the Eastern Conference. As of this recording, they are riding a 10-game winless streak, and before their latest game, Sabres owner Terry Pegula reportedly met with players to assure them that he had confidence in this group and that he believed that the answer to the organization's recent downturn was in this room. They followed up that encouragement by getting dummied 6-1 by the Montreal Canadiens. And so while the season isn't over for the Buffalo Sabres, it's looking incredibly bleak at the moment, and it seems very unlikely that this team, which again is the worst in the East at the moment and is mediocre at best when it comes to the advanced analytics projecting forward, it seems like it's appropriate to call time of death on the Buffalo Sabres season. So let's take a look back at exactly what went wrong for the Sabres and what the heck they're going to do going forward.
Saber.
Oh,
It's Saber.
Yes.
Of course.
Saber.
And to answer the first question about what went wrong for the Sabres, we kind of have to take a look back at where they were at the beginning of the season. The Buffalo Sabres had just hired a new coach, or more accurately, their old coach in Lindy Ruff. They were entering the season after a 2023-24 campaign in which they ended with 84 points, which is good enough to finish 6th in the Atlantic Division and 7 points short of the final wildcard spot. With the Sabres being one of the youngest teams in the NHL entering the 24-25 season, there was a lot of hope and optimism that this team, who had young stars who were beginning to enter the peak years of their careers, were going to take a step forward. Guys like Owen Power, Rasmus Dahlin, Tage Thompson were the headliners, but other guys that they had brought in like JJ Peterka, Dylan Cousins, the younger Zach Benson, and new veteran acquisitions like Jason Zucker and Ryan McLeod would be able to help guide this team towards the playoffs for the first time since 2010. So what happened? Well, plain and simply, the Buffalo Sabres have been let down in two major areas this year: defense and goaltending. On the season, the Buffalo Sabres have the 8th worst expected goals for ratio amongst all NHL teams and have the 7th worst expected goals against of all teams according to Money Puck. They've allowed the 6th most high danger shots against on the year and have blocked the 7th fewest shots on the year. And honestly, there are two main culprits as to why the Sabres have been so bad defensively. One being their third line. According to Money Puck, among forward lines that have played at least 100 minutes together, the line of Jordan Greenway, Ryan McLeod, and Jason Zucker ranks 16th worst in expected goals against per 60 minutes. Now, while that might not seem that bad, their 2.53 expected goals for per 60 would rank them 5th worst among those teams that have the bottom 20 expected goals against. In other words, unlike some other lines, their bad defense is not offset by good offense. As a result, this line unsurprisingly has the 10th worst expected goal for ratio of any forward line with 100 minutes together, but notably, that line is the 2nd most deployed line by Lindy Ruff for the Buffalo Sabres, despite it being so ineffective. So in other words, Lindy Ruff has played around with the lines trying to find a more effective combination, but it doesn't seem to be working. The other major component behind the Buffalo Sabres' major defensive woes is unfortunately related to one of their most prominent defensemen. Despite the fact that he has played the 2nd most minutes of any player on the Buffalo Sabres, more even than Rasmus Dahlin, the team captain, Owen Power ranks 6th worst in expected goal for ratio among players on the Sabres who have played at least 300 minutes. But what's even more concerning for Power is the fact that he ranks 3rd worst on the team in terms of on-ice expected goals against per 60, and he is the worst defenseman on the team in that category. And taking it wide, amongst defensemen who have played at least 500 minutes on the year, Power ranks 112th out of 127 qualifying defensemen. That's 16th worst among all defensemen who have played 500 minutes on the year. And while Power is slightly above league average in terms of generating offense amongst defensemen with over 500 minutes, it is unfortunately not enough to offset his poor defensive play, which is why he ranks 89th in on-ice expected goal ratio. And look, Power is still very young. He's only 22 and this is his 4th season in the NHL, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention that he just signed a 7-year contract worth $8.35 million per year annual average value. He is paid as a top 20 defenseman in the NHL, but his play is not close to reflecting that. And I'm not saying that the Sabres need to act rashly and trade Owen Power, but they need more out of him in the coming years if they don't want to have a repeat of this year. That leads me to the second major reason the Sabres have failed this year, which is the goaltending. Even though Sabres fans have hyped up Devin Levi for a couple of years now, it's quite clear at this point that he has not developed to the point he needs to. He's the 7th worst goalie in the NHL in terms of goals saved above expected per 60, and has been firmly supplanted in the battle to be #1 goaltender by Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, as he's played in only 8 games this year to Luukkonen's 22. With an .876 save percentage and a .379 GAA on the year, Levi is looking like a disaster in net, but UPL has not been much better. He's at an .896 save percentage and 3.00 GAA on the year, and amongst the 34 goalies who have played at least 15 games on the year, UPL is 25th in goals saved above expected per 60. Right now, the Sabres' best goaltender unironically might be James Reimer, who came in from Anaheim and is rocking an .899 save percentage, and the only one of them who has a GAA below 3. But if you've got to go with Optimus Rhyme as your starting goaltender in the year 2024, you are pretty well screwed. So that leads us to the final question about the Buffalo Sabres, which is what exactly do they do going forward? And the first thing I'll say is that the Buffalo Sabres should not fully tank and rebuild. They've done that before several times. They've gotten 2 #1 overall picks with Rasmus Dahlin and the aforementioned Owen Power, neither of which have worked very well. They've also drafted 2nd overall in the last 10 years, picking up guys like Jack Eichel and Sam Reinhart, who turned out to be really good players, just not for the Buffalo Sabres. At this point, I truly worry that losing has just infected the Sabres organization as a whole, and they need to make moves proactively to just try and win now. And one guy that we know is available that I think the Sabres should go after aggressively is New York Rangers forward Chris Kreider. He's a guy who brings a lot of leadership and grit. He's got attitude and moxie, and even though he hasn't won a cup, he's been on some very successful Ranger teams. I would also move very aggressively to get a goaltender, and the guy who seems like a natural fit is New Jersey Devils backup Jake Allen, who's been having himself a pretty good year in limited appearances. You could also, if you wanted to wait a little bit for Freddie Anderson to come back from injury, pick him up because the Carolina Hurricanes might be willing to move off of him and just ride with Kochetkov. Or hell, be really aggressive and go after Anaheim's John Gibson. The point is that the Sabres need to make moves actively to try and right the ship now. Even if it might not get them into the playoffs this year, they need to build a team that's going to be competitive next year. I would not move major futures for this, certainly not the 1st round pick that might become a 1st overall or top 5 pick the way the Sabres season is going. I also wouldn't move off of their young guys like Dylan Cousins, who's been rumored to be on the move, or a guy like Bowen Byram, unless the return was a legitimate top 6 forward like Kreider or a top 4 defenseman. But the simple fact of the matter is that the Sabres cannot continue to do what they've done for the last decade plus, which is to just trust that young players are going to elevate this organization. They have good players. Tage Thompson's a really good forward. Dahlin is a legitimate top pairing defenseman. This team and this organization, quite frankly, just needs to get out of the mindset that they are going to be good in the future. They should be thinking, how can we be good now?